Today's video is going to be all about what no one tells you when house hunting in Australia.
If anybody out there was wondering what the Perth rental market's like at the moment, well, in a word, it's
My husband and I moved to Perth about a month ago, and we have been house hunting semi-humid and semi-horrified, and I'm going to be sharing exactly why in this video.
There must have been 50 plus people at the home open. Is it time to buy your own home and say goodbye to renting?
If you think it's hard to get a rental now, wait until another 700,000 migrants arrive in Australia over the next 12 months.
No, I'm sorry. Are people who are like landlords or like renting a room out in Perth actually on drugs? Like, are they actually on drugs? Like, you go to look at like a room for rent, it looks really nice, you go to apply for it, no couples, like FIFO only, you can't cough, you can't fart. Like, I'm not able.
In part one, we're going to be covering the landlord's sentiment and experience as I've extrapolated off of Reddit. Part two is generally the renter's sentiment, how people are feeling in this market. And then finally, I'm going to be finishing off with my own experiences for what those are worth. If you're new here, my name is Megs and I'm a 30-something who's clearly recently relocated to Perth. I typically share digital marketing videos, but in today's video, of course, we're going to be veering a little bit off topic to talk about a topic close to my heart, which is the struggles of finding a place to stay in Perth. Alright, so let's get started with the landlord's perspective. So this Reddit thread has truly made me laugh and want to cry all in one. So I'm going to be reading you an excerpt from this landlord's perspective. And shame, he does get taken to the cleaners in the comments a little bit in terms of people disagreeing with his opinion, so bear that in mind. So he says, "You'll keep on complaining how hard it is to get a rental in Perth. Here's a perspective from the other side and what really happens when you try to rent out your space." So the landlord privately advertised a 2-bedroom unit for rent and he got smashed with inquiries. Those are his words. He'd organized 2 concurrent viewings after work to make sure that everyone has equal chance to attend, which, just a sidebar, that's very unusual. Almost all of the viewings that we've attended have been during working hours, which I understand because there's such a shortage of places available at the moment. The real estate agents are not going to go out of their way to accommodate after-hour viewings when they don't have to. The person gets 120 inquiries and 20 or 30 were attached with, "We're absolutely desperate, please help us." Despite the hordes of interest, he had 8 groups of viewings across the 2 evenings and received 4 applications of total, in which 3 were good. His main issues were the fact that there'd been very little effort put into the applications, or they took too long to put forward an application, which in his words is more than a few hours. He also mentions to clean up your Facebook page. A locked page is as sus as one full of middle finger signs and face tattoos, which you'll see is something that people take obviously extreme object to. He says in the bonus points section, not having your own tenancy database checks from Equifax or realestate.com is kind of a red flag to him because those would easily show that you're not blacklisted and it puts a private landlord completely at ease. You can understand his general sentiment. But the comments are where things get really interesting. So this is going to be part 2, which is really the general sentiment, which I think is brought to life beautifully in this Reddit thread. So basically people are saying it's taken them 6 months of practically full-time searching to try and find a new rental. So there's just a general lack of sensitivity in the way his original post is written, where it's like not taking into account just how stressful the experience is likely to be to the applying tenants. They point out also that expecting a cover letter and a lot of documentation can feel a bit like jumping through fiery hoops. People have pointed out, rightfully so, that you don't want to line up with 30 or 40 others to grovel and offer $70 to $80 more in the hope that you're just going to be considered. One of my favorites, a locked Facebook page is a red flag. Get effed. You're not entitled to look at someone's personal Facebook page. You're a walking red flag if ever I've seen one. You're demonstrating what most people are starting to learn about landlords in Australia. You see renters as a disposable source of building your wealth. Renters are just numbers, applicants to you, and you should step in line and satisfy every requirement of yours. Shouldn't housing be a human right instead of a competition? Fair point. There's someone who says, I'm a single mum with a young kid and they want a single FIFO doctor with millions of savings. You have no idea how degrading this feels, and if you did care, you'd rent to me. So FIFO, if you're not from WA, means fly in, fly out, and it's typically people who work on the mines in a sort of rotational basis. Someone else, he wanted 120 people to show up and have a bidding war and get more money. He's unhappy that that didn't happen. Does anyone have a tiny little tissue? And my pièce de résistance, which I'm going to read an excerpt to you guys. O noble landlord, I beseech thee for shelter on this cold and dreary eve. As a lowly serf, I toil in the fields from dawn till dusk, my hands calloused and my back bent under the weight of endless labor. The meager coins I earn barely suffice to fill my belly with bread, and my thatched hovel provides little protection from the biting winds. In your grand manor, I see a haven of warmth and security. I would gladly surrender a portion of my meager wages to dwell within your walls. Anyways, it goes on like this. At the end, it says, I offer to bathe your lord's feet in milk and honey, while you do so, as your feet must be suffering from dealing with so many serfs who are not worth your effort or time. I'll do my best to attend the open hearth you've so graciously set aside, but alas, I fear my 2 jobs may hinder my attendance. Please forgive me if I'm late or unable to attend. So as you can see, it's a very polarizing thread that he's inadvertently begun, because he's trying to, rightfully so, point out that obviously being a landlord, as much as it seems like the dream, there are a lot of concerns and challenges that come along with that. I'm sure opening your home to people who you don't know if they're going to pay their rent on time. But then you can also see from these hysterical comments on that there's a whole different underbelly that he's basically rooted up, where people are pointing out all the reasons why it's impossibly difficult as your average Joe to actually get a rental in Perth. So part 3 is going to be my perspective, and you guys, please feel free in the comments to let me know if you agree or disagree. But certainly I'm hoping that I can open a little bit of dialogue around this in the comments about whether you agree with the landlord or not. I feel like there are a lot of great resources out there with a lot of explanations on the macroeconomics which have led Australia to this point. So this is not the correct video if that's what you're looking for. So I'm going to suggest that you watch this particular video. It's something that I really enjoyed and I found very impactful in terms of understanding the various macro and micro factors which have led us to this place. What I will start out by saying is that just in being an immigrant, I am part of the problem. So people, obviously there's a lot of sensitivity around this because you don't want to be granted a visa to Australia and then made to feel unwelcome. And I'm not saying by any stretch that you should be. Our initial landlord obviously also pointed out that immigrants are a big source of demand, and so therefore a lot of the problem. And there's another bit of video where this guy that I referenced earlier also clearly articulates that it's adding a lot of pressure. He also brings up the factor of international students. So in addition to Western Australia and Perth specifically being a stronghold, obviously, for oil and gas mining, there's also a lot of educational enterprise that happens in Perth. So I think there's something like 5 universities, if I'm not mistaken, if not more. I'm sure there's many private colleges, but there's a huge demand obviously from the international student populace, which is all well and good because they're paying exorbitant fees effectively to be in Australia studying by their parents who want them to have the best possible education. To resent them now for the demand that they're causing on the housing situation is a tricky one at the best of times. That being said, I'm also hugely empathetic to the average Australian because you cannot deny that we are negatively impacting the general issue of supply and demand by being here. So things like COVID had a hugely negative impact in terms of the cost of building. It also delayed any building processes that were underway with new developments. So now things are more expensive and very delayed. And there's a huge boom in people who previously weren't able to get into the country due to COVID. We're all doing a sort of mass immigration in because we're able to, but the core issue of housing has not been resolved. So Australia has a notorious reliance on immigrant skills. They rely on talented nurses, doctors, surgeons, anaesthetists, lecturers, you name it. There's so many people on that skills shortlist that they want people in, but then simultaneously, like I've mentioned, there aren't places for those people necessarily to stay. And this is compounded by the fact, mind you, that Australia has a very low unemployment rate. It's less than 4% of people. So 96% of people are gainfully employed in some capacity, and therefore, obviously, they want to spend their hard-earned money on a decent place to live. And many migrants, ironically, are also part of the solution. So To use my husband as an example, he is an architect, right? So yes, he is coming into Australia and requiring a place to live, but he simultaneously has the skills to help address some of those issues because he literally works in residential architecture. So it's quite a nuanced challenge. You can't just say don't let migrants in because you obviously need people for healthcare, people like architects who can help solve the problem as well. So complicated and super nuanced. Anyways, I digress. I'm going to walk you through the process and how it's intended to work if you are coming into Perth or Western Australia or Australia in general and you're looking for a place to stay who's now curious as to how this all works. So as I mentioned in my video, pros and cons of moving to Australia, I share the fact that there's a very popular app here called realestate.com.au, which from a UX perspective, I can't really fault. And in addition to this tool, there's also an inbuilt tool which allows you to see the demand on various neighborhoods. Even if you know nothing as a transplant, there's going to be great insights in terms of whether a place is good to live. And I would strongly suggest looking at a website called Microburbs. You can see things like hipster factors, if it's family friendly, not, and so forth. And on realestate.com.au, you can see what has the most supply for the kinds of homes that you're looking for. And you can see what has the most demand based on this tool, which is going to help you see what the median amount of interest each of the various areas are attracting. So the areas which my husband and I are particularly interested in moving to include West Perth, Subiaco, North Perth, East Perth, Como. But basically, you could just plug in where you're looking for, and then you're going to book an inspection. So most of the time, you're not able to put in an application before you've viewed the place. In very few instances, you can. Most of the time, you're just literally going to book an inspection and rock up. Like people have mentioned, there are a lot of people at these home viewings, so I'll share a few clips either from my own personal collection or from TikTok, but you'll see it can be quite an overwhelming and disheartening experience at the best of times. Following this, you're going to do your application process, provided that you didn't see anything you didn't like at the home open, and you're going to provide an inordinate amount of information. This includes your previous landlord's information, a previous manager at work's information, 2 personal references who aren't technically meant to be friends or family, what car you drive, the registration of the car you drive, up to 5 years worth of rental and employment history. And I have no doubt people are also providing things like Facebook profiles, because we know that our landlord friend wanted that. And although you curiously can't upload a cover letter in some of these application portals, most of the time they'll give you a reference number and you can then email through something like a letter of recommendation from your previous landlord or a cover letter, which is highly suggested that you do so. So apart from the sheer volume of information that you're giving, you're also giving agents permission to contact people. And while I don't mind them doing it the first time around, if you are struggling to find property and you're applying to 10 to 20, you can imagine how repeatedly contacting your old manager or old landlord is going to look on you. It makes us feel incredibly uncomfortable as a couple because you're basically pulling your whole immediate sphere of people through this process with you. You also have to supply 3 payslips or an offer letter from your company. I don't have payslips currently because I only started my role really recently. So that would, I think, count against me, although I can provide bank statements. And you also need to supply the HR details of your current employer for them to contact your current employer to verify that you are in fact working for the company. So at the end of this very laborious process, you're going to see a tally of what you would owe if you were successful in your application, which typically includes 4 weeks as a security or bond. Then there's an additional 2 weeks that you need to pay. Then there's a pet bond if you have a pet. So funnily enough, this isn't allowed in a lot of states, but in WA it is allowed. And you can be charged up to $260 for your pet, which also seems a bit ludicrous, but anyways. And there's also strong encouragement to pay for this documentation, which checks you against your rental database, which our landlord friend also mentioned. When you are rejected, or if you are rejected, oftentimes you will receive no communication whatsoever. So there've been a few instances where we just haven't been let know, or I'll put some things on the screen of what comes through. We have been rejected quite a few times at this point. But I want to point out that this video is by no means a sob story. I know that there's nothing personal about this process, but I just want to commiserate with other people who may be going through something similar. So my hopes that by sharing some of our experiences are going to help you to understand what to expect if you are planning on moving to WA anytime soon. We have actually received our very first "You have been shortlisted" message, which is either a very good sign on the real estate agent for even keeping you posted, or is a factor of the fact that previously we were applying with just one job offer, which was mine, and now recently my husband's received his job offer, so now we're able to be basically a DINK, dual income, no kids, which is helpful. And I believe that a big factor in their decision or in their initial screening process would be that 30% rule, so making sure that you're not spending more than 30% of your monthly income on rent. There's also a relatively low probability of securing the tenancy, and I can imagine this is particularly difficult for a single income family. So you're competing with dual income, FIFO, and people in tech, let's say. With us, for many of these applications that we've put through previously, we were actually just offering the weekly rental price, as naive as we were, not realizing that that's not going to get you the property. So I would suggest looking at places that are slightly lower your budget and adding between $50 and $80. This is controversial because you're basically entering people into a bidding war. But at this point, you know, if you can't beat them, join them is kind of where I'm getting to. And I personally don't share the disdain for real estate agents. I previously actually worked for a real estate agent company in South Africa as a digital marketing manager, and people are just trying their best. It's not that the real estate agent is out to get you. It's the factor of supply and demand and them trying to actively work out for their landlord who's going to be the best tenant. So that's what no one's really explaining in any great detail. I think people will give you snippets of what it's like, but I'm hoping that by sharing 3 different perspectives, I'm able to give you a more well-rounded version of what to expect. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them down below. I'd love to hear from you what your experiences have been, and please cross your fingers and toes for us on the 3 applications. I'm hoping that the next video will be a house tour or some version of that, because I really feel like bringing you guys along for this journey is very necessary, especially when it has been so difficult. But thank you guys so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video so we can keep on doing digital better. Bye.
How can I pick up the pieces when everything breaks with every day? I'm getting older, I feel the weight upon my shoulders. I'm strong